Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narativ, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
When you are sitting across from a colleague, and we've all been there, they're so frustrated, they have this big problem, they just verbally vomit on you for 10 minutes. And they go on and on and on and on, and you listen very patiently. When they finally wear themselves out and take a breath, you say, "Oh, Julienne, here's what I heard you say." And then you repeat it back to them using the ABT. You know, you and your team want this, and it's really important to you because of this, but you're extraordinarily frustrated or fearful or whatever because of this major problem here. Therefore, we need to look for a fix. Maybe it's down here. That just opens up the conversation.
All right, great. Well, that was Park Howel in episode 97, talking about a very specific structure that he uses, for storytelling and helping people how to essentially have a better message and something that's more to the point, but that kind of makes that connection with people. And we courageously went through the.
You didn't give us a choice.
That's right. But I guess we could have said no. But it was great. I mean, I personally learned a lot. I thought that the message that came out of the process of saying, okay, here's the agreement, but here's the problem that our listeners might be experiencing, and therefore here's our solution. Right? I think it's a great reminder of how you can put a compelling message together.
Yeah, I think, well, his lifeblood was always branding and advertising. So he's a pro, and it's been proven on so many different levels. So it was interesting to look how he dissected in his own learning journey. And I thought that was such an important part of his conversation, that he became a student again after years of success to re-examine what the world was ready to how experience his work and expertise. And he talked about, learning from his son when his son was going through film studies. And then he turned the tables on us and he started to teach us. And my internal voice was going, well, do what you preach, be the student, be vulnerable. But it is funny when we become our own subjects.
Yeah.
Stretch and test. But I think his method's very interesting. And then you were just saying how there's similarities from what he did with the and we should tell everyone the and but therefore method to structure a story and a product message or a person message to what we do. So why don't you, it would be good if you talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's right. He talked, at length about his ABT and then used it on us to see what our message for our podcast would be, which I thought was really effective. And it kind of brought to mind, the similarities and differences between the narrative methodology of storytelling and what Park presented to us and to our listeners. First of all, the similarities, story structure, I think, a few times he talked about the connection with the brain. And we know this. We know that people respond to stories like nothing else. We remember stories more than anything else, more than statistics or more than data. There is that connection that's just inherent to human beings. And so I think that was a good reminder of that. Story structure works. If you put things in a certain order, and he's figured out that order of the and, but, therefore, it's going to be a lot more effective. And he gave us some great statistics around that, which I truly believe, because that you can see that and you can feel it when you hear a message that's structured in a way that's more like a story. And then, of course, the intentionality and the purpose behind it. Why am I telling a story? Which is always where we start as well. I think the two things that struck me as, let's say, complementary, actually, is once you have the structure of that story, is what in the story makes it. What are the details that you choose? We hear this a lot, right? It's like, oh, do I have too many details? Do I not have enough details? And people really get caught up on that, get caught up on the details. Whereas for us, there's only one question to ask, when you're a storyteller, which is what happened to you, what was the experience that you went through, and tell me about the details and unique aspects of that experience as if I was following you around with a documentary film crew, right? And I could see and hear everything that was going on. And I could also use all three other senses, right? So through those five senses, really bring to life the experience that you had rather than, and this is really key because most people do this, rather than saying what you felt about what happened to you, what you thought about what happened to you, what kinds of conclusions you made, the interpretations you had about what happened to you. Not that those are not valid, but very often people start with that. And that's not a story. The story is actually what happened. And then further on in the dialogue and the conversation with your audience, your listeners, you can talk about and they can ask you about your interpretations. But mostly what you're helping them do is you're letting them have the feelings, you're letting them have the thoughts and interpretations.
And one of the most important things when I was thinking about our conversations with Park is after it's like, why am I going through these exercises with people? Am I asking them to buy a product? No, I'm asking them to buy into themselves, first of all, as humans, to figure out what's driving them, and also to buy into each other when they're sitting with a group in a room and they're stuck in their conversations, or they're not having good interactions, or they've stopped looking at each other in a positive way, or they need a fresh eye. So the story work disrupts that. So even though I love being entertaining and funny and engaging and I love the energy, that's not the whole driving point. It's what happens when we finish telling a story. Are is the group starting to listen to each other or giving them the grace of a few seconds of attention before they snap back into their bad habits? So I think that was a great lesson for me, to keep bringing that up, not making it an assumptions. I want you to talk to each other and
Yes.
learn. That way you can go off and actually do all the great work you can and stop
Yeah.
wasting time. So that was
Yeah.
brilliant.
And the other thing that really struck me in the conversation with Park, and we heard it in the quote too, you know, this idea of listening first. And
Mm-hmm.
we often talk about ourselves as, listening, being a listener first before we're storytellers. And that goes also for our clients, right? When we deliver these kinds of training programs and workshops, we never start with tell me a story and then I'll tell you how to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole buildup that always starts with listening. And when you're with a client, it may sound obvious, but a lot of times that kind of goes out the window because you've got your own agenda. You've got your beautiful deck that you created, and maybe you also feel the pressure to sell, to pitch, to convince, whatever it is. And so you come in and you've figured out these amazing arguments with your team and based on months of research.
Mm-hmm.
And there you are finally with the human being that's going to make a decision, and you just steamroll them with your content before they've been able to even say, well, that was a few months ago. Now we're in a different place. Or yes, you're right. I still agree that this is where we are, but figure out where that person is first. Let them be the first to speak. That's number one when you're out there in the world, and when you're in our workshops, what you'll experience is making yourself your first listener, because so
Mm-hmm.
often what gets in the way of our ability to be present, to listen to somebody else, is our inability to listen to ourselves. And so there's somewhere a voice of judgment, or some kind of negative critique going on, and a lot of times that's what we have to sort of out, and figure out strategies to set those kinds of obstacles aside. And only then can stories that are truly meaningful, relevant, relatable, can those come up to the surface. And once they come up to the surface, then we apply all these sort of structural methodologies and the what happened question, etc. But it always has to start with listening, and it has to start with you.
Yeah. And as we close, if everyone out there who's listening challenges themselves to think about when we got into conversation or relationship trouble, it was we talked too much, or maybe we didn't talk at all when we should have. We stopped listening, or when we were listening, we were already writing a dialogue in our head. So we were making assumptions. So I think one of the great lessons of this session was sometimes we have to practice story tourism, that we travel to another part of the story world where this expert is using his gifts to go with branding and product and come back with some new information, new insights. So
Yeah.
it's fun, it's interesting. And I'm looking forward to re-watching that episode a few times because I could see like my brain thinking that whole session when he was posing questions. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that your this principle of story tourism. Story tourism. I think it's such a perfect analogy in terms of where people can go and kind of keeping that curiosity alive. That's really what it's about for me. So great. Well, thanks once more for doing this. I love these short little debrief episodes where we get to riff a little bit on what our guests told us and get a chance to process things a little bit more, digest them, and then see. I know that with this conversation with Park, I'll be taking things from that conversation, that are going to show up in our work for sure. So it makes everything much richer. So with that, I want to remind you, our listeners, to please tell everybody you know about this podcast, because there's so much, there's a wealth of information here, and that's what we want. We really want people to learn from this and to be able to use these kind of practical strategies that we give out and that our guests are very generous in sharing. And of course, go to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to the podcast, leave a review. And then you can also go to our YouTube channel at narativ.com, Narativ, to find us, and you'll see us in more than one dimension. And then finally, if you're interested in learning more about the methods that we teach at Narativ in our training programs and workshops, please get in touch with us. Again, you can go to narativ.com for that. And yeah, we're always ready to listen. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narativ.com.